On the night of September the 11th, 1971, a man in London switched on his radio and picked up a conversation that should never have reached his receiver. Voices, calm, methodical, talking about drilling, about timing, about waiting for a lorry to pass in the street outside. He had no idea he was listening to a bank robbery in progress, live, block by block, as it happened. 4 days later, that story vanished from every newspaper in Britain. Not because it ended, because someone made it stop. That's the case file. Let's open it. 2 doors down from the Baker Street branch of Lloyds Bank, there used to be a leather goods shop. It sold handbags and briefcases, nothing more, nothing that drew a second look from anyone walking past. In May of 1971, the lease on that shop changed hands. A man named Benjamin Wolfe put down £10,000 and signed his own name to the paperwork. Nobody at the bank thought twice about it. Why would they? Shopkeepers rent premises every week in central London. Leases change hands. A new sign goes up. Life on the street continues exactly as it did the day before. What nobody knew was that the new tenants had no interest in handbags. They had rented that shop for one reason only. It sat close enough to the vault of Lloyds Bank that, given enough time, enough silence, and enough nerve, a man could dig from one to the other, underground, unseen, for as long as it took. That's the surface of it. A bank was robbed, safe deposit boxes were opened, some money went missing. On paper, unremarkable, one line in a police ledger. Underneath, something far stranger was happening, and it had almost nothing to do with the bank itself. It had to do with what people hide, and how far they'll go to make sure nobody ever finds out what it was. Because a safe deposit box in central London in 1971 wasn't just for cash. Jewelers kept stock there between shows. Families kept documents, deeds, the kind of paperwork that outlives a person. Businessmen kept things they didn't want on a company ledger, and a few people, almost certainly, kept things they'd never want a court, or a spouse, or a tax office to see. Nobody asks a bank to justify what's inside a locked box. That's the entire point of renting one. Keep that in mind. It matters later. The idea came from Sherlock Holmes, specifically from a short story called The Red-Headed League, in which a gang tunnels into a bank vault from the basement of a shop next door. Anthony Gavin, the man who planned this robbery, had read it. He was not a first-time criminal. He'd spent years already moving through the edges of London's underworld, learning what worked and what got men caught. And where most people close a book like that and move on with their evening, Gavin looked at a 100-year-old piece of fiction and thought, why not? Not as a joke, as a blueprint. He recruited 3 others: Reginald Tucker, Thomas Stevens, and Wolfe, the man who would later sign the lease. 4 men, none of them engineers, none of them trained in construction or demolition, deciding together that a children's detective story held the working plan for one of the boldest robberies London had ever seen. That's worth sitting with. The gap between reading something and actually doing it is usually where most people stop. This gang didn't stop there. They treated a plot device as a set of instructions. Over the weekends that followed, while the shop's front stayed locked and quiet, and the handbags sat untouched in the window, the 4 of them worked underground, cutting a tunnel roughly 40 feet long, just wide enough for one man at a time, aimed directly at the floor of the Lloyds vault. Weekends only. That detail matters more than it sounds. A bank vault is busiest, most watched, most alive during the week. Weekends, especially Saturday nights into Sunday mornings, buy a crew silence. No staff, no deliveries. No reason for anyone to walk past a locked leather shop and wonder why there's a faint sound of digging beneath the floorboards. The gang built their entire operation around that quiet, one weekend at a time, patient enough to stop, cover their tracks, and start again the following week. Digging the tunnel was, in a strange way, the easy part. Getting through the vault floor was not. Their first attempt used a thermic lance, a tool that burns through metal and concrete at extreme heat, more commonly used for cutting through steel in industrial settings. It failed. The floor held, so the gang changed the plan entirely. They drilled a series of holes into the underside of the vault floor and packed them with gelignite, an explosive stable enough to transport and handle without much risk, but powerful enough to do real damage if placed correctly against reinforced concrete. But an explosion in central London, even one happening underground, makes noise. And noise draws attention, especially at night, especially near a bank. So the gang did something almost absurd in its precision. They waited for traffic. Baker Street, even late on a Saturday, still carried enough passing vehicles that a lorry rumbling by could mask the sound of a blast for anyone walking the pavement above. They didn't set off their charge on a fixed schedule. They set it off on the street schedule, timing detonation to a passing engine instead of a clock. It worked. A hole roughly 12 inches wide opened in the vault floor above them, just wide enough for one man to climb through into a room built specifically to be unreachable. Here's where the plan gets even stranger. The vault had trembler alarms built into the floor, designed to trigger on vibration, meant to catch exactly the kind of digging and drilling this gang was doing. But weeks of nearby roadworks, jackhammers, and heavy machinery running through the district had set those alarms off so many times, on so many false triggers, that engineers had switched the whole system off entirely before the gang ever broke ground. And according to later accounts, someone connected to the security company confirmed, directly or indirectly, that the alarms were down and the timing was safe to move. That is not luck. That is reconnaissance. That is a plan built on knowing exactly which system in a supposedly secure building was already broken and exploiting that break before anyone in authority thought to fix it. Once inside, the gang didn't touch the bank's main safe. They went straight for the safe deposit boxes, the private lock boxes rented out to individual customers, businesses, and account holders who paid extra specifically for privacy, for the assurance that whatever they stored there would stay unseen. Over that weekend, the gang opened 268 of them. Roughly a quarter of every box in the vault, one after another, working through the night. One gang member had mapped the entire vault in advance, using nothing more than an umbrella and the span of his own arms, measuring distances and matching them to whatever he could learn about the room's layout ahead of time. No blueprints, no inside photographs, no help from an architect, just patience, close observation, and a man willing to measure a bank vault the same way you'd measure a room for a new piece of furniture. By any conventional standard, this was not a smash and grab. It was closer to a small, disciplined engineering project that happened to be illegal, run by men who treated a bank robbery the way a contractor treats a job that has to be finished quietly, on schedule, and without a single visit from an inspector. And think about the nerve that takes, week after week. Walking away from a half-dug tunnel on a Sunday morning, sealing it, locking the shop, and going home to an ordinary Monday, knowing the job sits there unfinished, knowing any one of a dozen small accidents, a curious neighbor, a burst pipe, a nosy landlord, could end it before it ever paid off. Most plans fail because someone panics under pressure. This one held together specifically because nobody did, for weeks on end. Every plan this careful usually has one place where the discipline slips. Here, it slipped twice, in two very different ways, and each one tells you something different about how this whole operation actually held together. The first slip happened in real time, while the robbery was still in progress, and it very nearly ended everything before the gang ever got through that floor. The gang communicated with a lookout, using walkie-talkies, standard equipment for the era, short range, and largely assumed by everyone using them to be private. It wasn't. A local radio enthusiast named Robert Rowlands, tuning through frequencies at home that Saturday night, out of nothing more than habit and curiosity, picked up their transmissions completely by accident. At first he heard fragments, numbers, short instructions, the kind of clipped, functional talk you'd expect between two people coordinating something they didn't want overheard. Then enough came through for him to realize what he was actually listening to. He called his local police station. They didn't believe him. He called again. Still nothing. So Rowlands did something almost nobody in his position would think to do at 11 o'clock on a Saturday night. He got out a small cassette recorder and began taping the voices coming through his own radio set, building a case, alone, in his own living room, for a crime he could hear happening but couldn't see and couldn't yet locate. Eventually, Scotland Yard listened. And here is the detail that makes this story almost unbearable if you know anything about radio range in 1971. Walkie-talkies of that era, operating in a dense urban environment full of buildings and interference, had a signal reach of maybe a mile or two at most. Rowlands told police as much, as clearly as he could. The bank had to be close, within a tight, walkable radius of wherever he was picking up the signal. Officers searched anyway, across a radius many times wider than the signal could have physically reached, checking hundreds of banks scattered across London while the actual robbery was still happening 2 doors down from where the search should have logically started. The police heard the crime unfold, almost live, word by word, and still could not find it in time to stop it. Picture that for a moment. A gang inside a vault, mid-blast, mid-theft, being listened to in real time by the very institution meant to stop them, and still walking away with everything they came for, simply because a radio signal that could only travel a mile or two got lost inside a search area stretched miles beyond it. Not a failure of effort, a failure of scale. The second slip happened away from the vault entirely, days and weeks later, and it is, in its own way, more human than anything involving explosives or tunnels or timed detonations. Benjamin Wolfe, the man who arranged the lease for that leather goods shop, signed it in his own real name. Not an alias, not a shell company, not even a trusted associate acting as a front. His name, on a legal document, tied directly to the one physical address that connected every part of the plan, the tunnel, the timing, the vault, all of it. When investigators started working the case, that lease was one of the very first threads they pulled, and it led them straight to Wolfe. From Wolfe, with help from informants who gave up first names and half-remembered details about a pub connected to the gang, it led straight to Gavin, Tucker, and Stevens. Within 4 days, police already had a working list of suspects. By late October, surveillance teams watched Tucker hand off a bag to 2 men who were arrested on the spot, carrying 32,000 pounds in cash. The rest of the gang was picked up within 48 hours of that single arrest. Think about what that actually means. A crew disciplined enough to time an explosion to passing traffic, patient enough to dig for weeks without ever being noticed, careful enough to confirm whether an alarm system was down before they ever broke ground. Undone, in the end, by paperwork. Not a witness in the dark. Not a mistake underground. A name, freely given, on a piece of paper nobody thought would matter. That's not a flaw in the tunnel. That's a flaw in human confidence. The same overconfidence that lets a meticulous planner assume the boring, bureaucratic parts of a crime don't matter as much as the clever, physical parts. It's a mistake that still ends careers and companies today, in far less dramatic circumstances than an underground vault job. Someone builds an elaborate, careful system, tests every mechanical piece of it twice, and forgets that the paper trail sitting quietly behind it all is just as real and just as traceable as the system itself. It's almost funny, in a grim way. Nobody cracked this plan by outthinking it. Nobody spotted the tunnel, guessed the timing, or noticed the disabled alarms before it was too late. The entire physical operation worked exactly as designed. What failed was something so mundane it barely feels like it belongs in the same story. A landlord's paperwork, filed and filled out the ordinary way, sitting in an ordinary drawer, waiting for someone with the right question to come looking. Even with 4 men convicted and sentenced, 12 years each for Gavin, Tucker, and Stevens, 8 for Wolf given his age, the case never fully closed. Not really. Only £231,000 was ever recovered by police. Estimates of what was actually taken from those 268 boxes range from £1.25 million to as much as £3 million, and nobody, to this day, knows the true figure with any certainty. That's not because the paperwork was lost or destroyed somewhere along the way. It's because most of the box holders never came forward to say what they'd actually lost in the first place. Sit with that silence for a second. Hundreds of safe deposit boxes were rented out specifically for privacy, specifically so their contents would stay unseen and unquestioned. And after they were emptied by strangers using explosives and a stolen weekend, the overwhelming majority of their owners said nothing at all. No claims filed, no lists submitted to police, no public complaints about property worth a fortune in 1971 money, sitting gone, unrecovered, unmentioned. Then there's the press blackout, the part of this story that has never been fully explained. It ran under headlines like the walkie-talkie robbery for 4 days straight, covered on Radio 4 and in the papers. And then it simply stopped, across every outlet, all at once, like a switch had been thrown. That kind of sudden, uniform silence in the British press of that era points toward one specific mechanism: a D-notice, an official government request asking editors to withhold information considered sensitive to national interest. It has never been officially confirmed, in any released record, exactly why this particular bank robbery warranted that kind of intervention. Later claims, most visibly through a film released decades afterward in 2008, and loosely based on this case, suggested a connection to intelligence services and compromising material allegedly held inside one of those boxes. That claim has never been substantiated by any official record made public. It remains exactly what it started as: a rumor attached to a very real and very well documented silence. The D-notice system itself is real and well documented. A long-standing arrangement between the British government and the press to withhold specific categories of information on national security grounds. That system existing isn't in question. What's never been placed on the public record is which category this particular robbery supposedly fell under, or who requested it, or why a burglary of safe deposit boxes, however audacious, would rise to that level in the first place. Every other detail of this case eventually reached a courtroom. That one didn't. So here's what's actually verified. No more, no less. A tunnel was dug. A vault was breached with precisely timed explosives. 268 boxes were opened in a single weekend. Roughly a tenth of what was likely stolen was ever recovered. And the people who owned the rest of it never said a single word about what they lost. Whatever was really sitting in those boxes, whoever they truly belonged to, someone out there walked away from what should have been a fortune's worth of lost property, rather than ever ask for it back. Every file in this series ends the same way, not with an answer, but with the next door left open. If a gang disciplined enough to time explosives to passing traffic can still be undone by a name on a lease, it's worth asking what smaller, quieter mistake might be sitting inside a plan you'd otherwise call perfect. The Baker Street job isn't remarkable because it worked. It's remarkable because of how close it came to working without leaving a single trace, and how far one very ordinary piece of paperwork still managed to reach into a very extraordinary crime. The next file on this desk moves from a tunnel under a London bank to a vault stacked with gold bullion, and a laundering chain built so tightly that it still took investigators years to trace it all the way back to a single, ordinary jeweler. Until then, this file stays open. Somewhere, whatever was really behind that vault door in September of 1971 is still unaccounted for, still unclaimed, still nobody's problem to explain. The hidden engine is always running. Most people just never look under the hood.